Welcome to episode 3 of the Andy Beshear podcast. It's been another week of confusion and chaos coming out of Washington, D.C. We've seen more federal employees lose their jobs. We've seen our economy reeling because of the president's tariffs. And so we come together during this time to try to process all of this chaos, difficulty, and confusion in a conversation between friends. The goal is to take on these topics, but do it in a way that takes a little bit of stress off your shoulders. And hopefully we learn a little, we laugh a little, even in the midst of difficulty, and we are refreshed for our week to come. Today's episode is a great one. We welcome U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar, who's going to talk about her upbringing, including her grandparents and parents and all they invested in her. She's going to talk about the why she got into politics, which is a very personal and moving story. We're going to talk about tariffs and the impact, especially on farmers in Minnesota and in Kentucky. And we've got a great story about a turkey that was supposed to get pardoned for Thanksgiving that charged the media and lost its immunity. Then we're going to have Jireina Weathers, who is the Commonwealth attorney, the DA of the largest city in Kentucky, who's going to talk about public safety as well as these mean attacks on diversity issues. Then I'm going to be joined by Jon and John, and we're going to talk about these federal firings and how they're impacting state agencies, and also talk a little bit about losing Pope Francis, a great faith leader, a great leader for this world. And finally, you're going to get Britainy Beshear, who is going to talk about things that you might not know about me. This is my wife of 19 years, but she doesn't take it easy on me at all. Let's get to the episode. On this week's episode of the Andy Beshear podcast, we're joined by U.S. Senator and former presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar. She is a senator who is showing significant leadership in Washington, D.C., and is going to share some of her story. We're going to get into her why, and then we're going to talk tariffs and the impact especially on farmers in her great state of Minnesota, as well as the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So, Senator, welcome to the Andy Beshear podcast.
Hey, Governor, it is great to be on, like the horse picture up there on the wall. And I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm excited to be on to talk on your new podcast. So thanks for having me.
Grateful you said yes, and grateful for your support throughout my political career. I know supported me in a number of different races. So very excited to have a friend on the podcast.
Excellent.
So tell us a little bit about your background, about growing up, a little bit about your parents.
Sure. So I grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis, and my mom was a teacher. She ended up teaching second grade till she was 70 years old. She had 30 second graders in her class. And my dad was a newspaper man. He actually started with the Associated Press, and then he ended up covering the Vikings, the Minnesota Vikings, when they were an expansion team. He became their main sports writer in the Minneapolis paper. Wrote 23 books, including a book sadly named, which is still relevant today, Will the Vikings Ever Win the Super Bowl? But my background, sort of from a Kentucky point, a Commonwealth point, being interested, is that my grandpa and grandma were both Slovenian, and my grandpa worked 1,500 feet in the underground mines. They weren't coal mines, they were iron ore mines, and it was really dangerous back then. And my grandpa became a foreman. He had quit school at a really, really young age because he had 9 brothers and sisters, and he was the oldest boy, and the parents got sick and died, and so it was his responsibility. And so my dad was the first one to graduate from high school, and then he ended up going to a 2-year community college, and from there, the University of Minnesota, got his journalism degree, served during the Korean War. He was stationed in Europe, came back, met my mom, who had come over from Milwaukee, And that's my story of my family. And I always think about that I'm the granddaughter of an iron ore miner, and the daughter of a teacher and a newspaper man, and the first woman elected in the state of Minnesota to the U.S. Senate. And none of that would have been possible if they hadn't put it all on the line. And my grandpa saved money in a coffee can. I always tell kids this story because it's also the power of education. What a difference that makes.
So I'm also second generation college. My dad being the first generation in his family, and I think a lot about how thankful I am for my parents and their view on education. But I also think about my grandparents, like you just talked about them, and the values they passed down. Do you think your grandfather having to take on such responsibility and even duty at such a young age was passed on to you, maybe part of why you do what you do?
I think so, because you have to always remember where you came from, and you think about the sacrifices that they made for you, and it gives you another sense of the world. I also got from them a sense of leadership, adventure. My grandpa, that I would hear when I started running for Senate, and I'd go up there to the Iron Range, I would hear stories of people who had dads who had worked in the mines with my grandpa. And they said that when he became one of the foreman would usually stand at the top and radio down when they explored a new part of the mine. But my grandpa Mike, who had these huge hands, was this big guy that he would always go with the guys, and he would always go first, and to, of course, taking the most danger going down there. And so those are the kinds of things that you remember in your heart, and you said, okay, if they did that, I should be able to get this bill passed, or I should be able to take a risk and take on this cause that people hadn't taken on before. I do think if you carry those stories with you, especially right now with what we're dealing with in our nation, it gives you a grounding with all the crap that goes on in politics, all the divides that happen every day, all the hatred, all of it. It just makes you think, okay, this is why I'm doing this, and this is who I'm doing it for. So
And I
why?
love that because this podcast is about trying to just get beyond the what we think and the why we think it, the diversity of our experiences, and not just putting somebody in a box of D or R, right or left, liberal or conservative, but recognizing that you've got a unique upbringing. I have a different unique upbringing, and all these things make us who we are. And so we try to get to both that and then the why. I think the why is one of the most overlooked things in politics, about what drives us and why we make the decisions we do. And I think you have a pretty special why about why you got into politics. Will you share it with us?
Sure. That's when our daughter, John, and my daughter Abigail was born, and she was really sick. I was at a law firm at the time, and she couldn't swallow the night she was born. And they did all these tests, and she ended up having to have a tube through her nose for about 6 months, and then a stomach tube for another year. And it was really, really hard. But and then she eventually got better. And when two things came out of that. Once I got involved in groups of parents with kids with disabilities, even though she didn't end up with a permanent disability, but it changed my whole mindset about what these parents are going through. And then the other thing was that when I was in the hospital, I got kicked out. And that was when you got kicked out in 24 hours. She was literally in intensive care.
Wow.
She couldn't swallow. They didn't know if she had a tumor. They kept doing all these x-rays, and they just had that rule. As long as I was okay, they were going to kick me out. I'd been up the whole 24 hours. And as my husband wheeled me out of the hospital, I go, I bet this wouldn't happen to, because at the time, all the insurance executives were men. So at the time, I said this would not have happened to the wife of the insurance executive. And so I ended up, she got a little better. We still were in a hard place, but the other people had had the same experience in my state. And so on a bipartisan basis, Democrats, Republicans, I ended up testifying for this 48-hour hospital stay. And our state was one of the first states that did it. And we passed it. And my first experience, which you know so well as a governor, but of a conference committee in the legislature was they couldn't say they were against it, but they were trying to delay it. And so um, I think it was like 4 or 5 pregnant friends to the conference committee because we're all having babies at the time. So they outnumbered the insurance lobbyists who were trying to say this shouldn't take effect for a year or two. And the legislators said, when should this take effect? And all my friends who had think they were going to have a baby any day, they raise their hand and they go, no. They literally had to take effect the next week. That's what happened. So that was my first thing. And then I got hooked on it because you could get something done and it was for the right reason.
Absolutely. It's that concept that the time we have in these jobs is a gift and a blessing. In a really chaotic world, at least we get up and do something about it, each and every day. So I know almost down to the day how much time I have left being governor. And sometimes in a speech, I'll say it down to the day, and people will laugh. And somebody will say, "So you're counting down?" And I said, "Yes, but not for the reasons that you think. It's that every day I've got is an important day that I can hopefully do something that helps people." So
Exactly. And like you said, sometimes small things matter just as much because, while a piece of legislation might be big, if you don't implement it right and you don't actually get it done, it's not going to help them. Or a small piece of legislation can help someone tremendously. Or just the way you get your staff to help people when they call in with things and answer their calls.
you and I have talked a lot about this current administration, about the policies that they're putting forward, and we could talk about 100 of them, and maybe that's what they want us to do, to talk about all 100. But what is hitting people the most is what's hitting them in their wallets, is making it harder for them to pay bills. That a president who was probably elected because the last group of movable voters thought that he'd make paying the bills a little easier, are finding he's doing things that are the exact opposite. You have a unique position on the Agriculture Committee about seeing the impact of his policies on farmers.
There are people that voted for President Trump, including a number of our farmers, who thought, okay, prices are too high. I want to improve our economy. They were upset about inflation, different things. And then when he won, they expected those promises to be met. And instead, what he did was put in these across the board tariffs. They want things to be made in America. Both of our states make a lot of stuff, ag
Yes.
or manufacturing. But they did not expect him to upend the entire economy to the point where costs are up, chaos is up, and the market is down. But they were not ready to deal with these across the board tariffs. I just think this has ended up being a fiasco. It's a $4,000 tax on every family, including $200 on groceries. So people's prices are going way up that they have to pay. And it hurts us in our economic expansion across the world. We want to be a country where we grow and make stuff, where we invent things, where we export to the world. And that can't happen if we cut ourselves off from the world's economy.
We talked about that $4,000 to $4,700 hit to American families on the last episode of the podcast, how it blows a hole in the budget, and how many families just aren't going to be able to get by. And then I think from how you started your answer, it compounds with cutting the rental assistance vouchers, which they're threatening to do, cutting Head Start, and what that would mean to these families that are already struggling, that can only go to work, or maybe both of them can only go to work because of it. If you're both taxing the American people who are struggling to get by and cutting the help that helps them get out there and be productive, how do people make it?
Yeah. And what we're supposed to be doing is having people's backs. Politics, as Paul Wellstone used to say, former Minnesota senator, should be about improving people's lives. And when I look at what they're proposing right now in Congress, which just should drive all the governors nuts, because what they're proposing, I'm all for keeping in place tax cuts for people making under 400,000. So let's start with that. However, they're proposing more tax cuts for the wealthiest, $50 million for every billionaire. What they are proposing right now would total $37 trillion in debt over 30 years, and 25 trillion of it is for the people making over 400,000 and the big companies and the like. And so instead of using that money to pay down the debt and do something on the deficit, instead of using that money to make private sector incentives for more housing or childcare, instead of using it, as you've pointed out, to make sure people can buy their groceries or make sure that their grandma or their mom is being able to stay in assisted living through Medicaid and retire with dignity. Half the people in this country, that's how they retire. And when they're in assisted living, that's paid for by Medicaid. They are messing around with the very fabric of life that guarantees that people have dignity in their retirement, that they keep the benefits that they earned, and that they're able to work hard and make a living and support their family. I'm actually just shocked at how far he's gone with this. And I'm someone that works, as you know, with Republicans. 2 Congress ago, I was #1 for bipartisan bills, #3 for getting them passed into law. Okay, Grassley beat me. But I actually believe that you can get things done with Republicans, but this has been so destructive of our economic moorings in this country that I'm just getting more and more worried every day if he doesn't pull this back.
All right, so we like to close our interviews on the Andy Beshear
Something more positive, Andy?
with some fun things. Well, so
Okay.
we talk about
Okay.
this, and this interview's been the perfect example of a conversation between friends where we can
Mhm.
talk about those really tough things, but then friends will always talk about something positive, maybe a little bit funny, right before they leave. So I want to ask you just a couple of questions, so
Okay.
people know a little bit about our choices that aren't political at all. If you
Okay.
had to choose, would it be Elvis or the Beatles?
I would choose the Beatles, but I would really choose Prince or Bob Dylan because they're
Oh,
both from Minnesota. And have you seen A Complete Unknown, the
wow,
movie?
I have
It's
not.
good. Okay. Oh, about Bob Dylan
I'll
with Timothy
oh,
Chalamet.
haven't
I,
yet.
okay, well, you have to see it. But I would choose the Beatles, but I would really choose one of our
All right,
Minnesota.
I like your answer. Are you?
I have an asterisk.
See, I would be Elvis. Are you
Of course you would.
cheese or chocolate?
I would be cheese because I'm such a big dairy state, and so I've grown to love cheese.
I'm
And
with
only
you.
in Minnesota do we carve out butter queens out of butter, but go on.
And
Yes.
if somebody asked what your secret superpower is, something you do well that has nothing to do with politics, what would it be?
Okay, well, okay, this is not cool to admit anymore, but I do really well with not a lot of sleep because everyone's supposed to get a lot of sleep. But that has allowed me to be a mom and be in office. I know we're not supposed to talk about politics. And it's allowed me to have 1 hour sleep in the Senate and then get on a plane and go home and do a full day. And that's the one thing I have. I also can say all 50 states with my memory.
So your superpower is actually useful.
Alabama, Alaska,
My,
Arizona, Arkansas,
mine,
California,
mine is
Colorado.
cooking the Thanksgiving turkey, which I now
Oh, really?
realize probably comes from Minnesota.
We have sent many turkeys to the White House. The actual turkeys for Thanksgiving that's been pardoned. But I will tell you one funny story because it involves our former governor, Dayton. He decided that he would invite me to the send off for Ted the Turkey to the White House. Obama was president. I got to be there, and Ted the Turkey got all excited about the lights from the media in the governor's reception area that he charged his pen, and the pen went down, and he charged the press corps, and there
Wow.
were feathers everywhere. And then the ag commissioner had to kind of get him back and calm him down. And so this was hilarious, and Ted calmed down. The next day, I got a call that Ted wasn't going to be allowed to be the turkey pardon, that he wasn't going to be allowed to spend his later days at Mount Vernon like the pardoned turkey does, and that beautiful, beautiful, expansive green lawn looking over the Potomac. And so I called the University of Minnesota. I go, this isn't fair. And they said, okay, well, what's happened, if you want to know the truth, is the White House has deemed Ted to be a flight risk. They don't want
Oh,
him come anymore. And so finally the governor called. He goes, you know what? You got to let this go. You got to let it go. Ted is going to end up as a Thanksgiving dinner, but they have 2 other turkeys that are going instead. And that is the sad story of the demise of Ted the turkey.
I'd always wondered what would beat our Willie Nelson poker story on the Andy Beshear podcast, and it is definitely the turkey charging the press corps and losing, I
And
guess,
then
his immunity
ending
from
his
Thanksgiving.
career. Ending his career.
Well,
so to say.
Senator, thank you so much for joining
Okay.
us.
Thank you. It was great to be on, Andy.
I'm now joined by a friend of mine for about a decade, a co-worker for many of those years, Jireina Weathers. Gerina is the Commonwealth attorney for Louisville and Jefferson County. She is the equivalent of the DA for the largest urban area in Kentucky. And she made history becoming the Commonwealth attorney and ultimately keeping this job. Today, we're going to talk about a couple different things. So welcome, Gerina.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Good to be here.
So being the top prosecutor in the largest city in Kentucky, public safety is your primary job.
Right.
So I've always thought one of the ways to decrease crime and make us safer is to prevent someone who has committed a crime and is in one of our correctional facilities from committing a crime in the future. And we talk about recidivism being that term.
Right.
Right? How many people that have been through our jails or prisons end up coming back to them? So a big thing that I've thought a lot about is second chances.
Right.
And the idea of what we can do to support people to once they've committed a crime, and we have the opportunity to say, how can we prevent you from ever doing that again? That makes us safer, and hopefully it means we get contributing members of society.
Right. And I agree. There should be some element of, I consider it like a team or a community of restoration, that it has to be everybody that is saying that, listen, they've done, whomever have done their time, and now it's time to look at what does this look like for us as a community. And it's always a sticky subject for me because my main goal is to move forward, build bridges, move with integrity, and also, though, continue to help make our community safe. And the way that you do that, there's some folk that need to be off the street. And then once they've done their time, there's still that space and time to say, are you ready? Are you ready to be part of the community? And I'll be honest with you, I think about my dad all the time. He's the reason why I'm an attorney. He used to send cases when I was a kid to me, and I had to go over it and look through it. And, Gerina, Gigi, tell me what you think about them. And I'm like, why am I doing this? And he is the one that said, because there are real people behind the V's. So it's Commonwealth v. whomever. We got to remember that they're real people. So no matter what side you're on as far as prosecution or defense, that's what you have to look at. But my dad died in federal prison. So, and I loved him and I respect him. He was a wonderful human being. He was a beautiful person, extremely brilliant, just a brilliant mind. But there's also some things that happened in the past. And he would say that now, if he were alive, he would say, what is it that you can do, Gigi, to make this better for someone like me? And it's tough. It really is tough, because that's why I do believe of restoration. I also believe that there should be some programs and services that are happening inside the jails. I mean, I'm talking about real ones,
Yes.
The ones that have to go to prison, and it's more than, for us, it could be up to 5, 20, 30 years, almost to life. But what's happening in the inside? Because it's this vicious cycle if we don't have a change, right? Is that really happening? Are we just putting people in prison and throwing them away? Because I believe that some people need to be in prison. I do believe that. But second chances also comes with developing someone and moving them somewhere where they've never been before. And that's all of our responsibilities. Some people don't feel that way, though. I mean, you're here to do this, and this is what you're supposed to do. But obviously, that's not working.
We're all here to try to make a better world.
That's exactly right.
And to solve the issues and the problems. That's our job as elected officials.
That's right.
And a lot of people think it's to battle it out, Democrats and Republicans, but it's supposed to be about creating a better life which is also a safer life for most people out there.
That's right. That's right. And you're brilliant at that. You really are, to be able to look outside of who we are and politicians and things like that. But if we don't get back to the core that we're just people supposed to be doing things, it is bigger than us. It's bigger than individuals.
And the common ground isn't partisan, even though people have tried to make it a good job. Your health care, the
Right.
roads and bridges you drive, the schools you drop your kids off at, and whether you feel safe in your community, I'm convinced, are those things that when we do better,
That's
when
right.
when we do better as in government, when we do better as a community, that lifts everybody up.
That's right. I agree. I agree.
I want to switch to another topic that you and I have had a chance to talk about over the years, and that's, at least recently, attacks on diversity initiatives primarily coming from our federal government. And I want to start this conversation by admitting that you can speak to this in a way that I can't. I will never feel the weight of discrimination, sexism, racism, but I know they exist in our society, and that it's incumbent that I listen and that I try to learn. So how generally does all this make you feel coming out of the federal government?
I will start with when we moved here in Louisville. It was in the 70s with forced busing. And we eventually moved out to the South End, and it was a different type of experience. I mean, it is what I learned is it is concerning when someone doesn't like you or opposes who you are just because of who you are. And the big part of what's going on with the initiatives now, or the lack thereof, is that it is not just about race. It goes all across the gamut. Even when I worked for you in personnel, the importance of understanding. My daughter just said it. She's in nursing now. And she just last week, she said, do you know that 1 in 36 kids have autism? And we talked through that process because
Right.
we have to have an ability to have access for very qualified, unique, beautiful people with different talents.
Yes.
And unique talents that you don't see anywhere else. And I think a lot of it is, some of it's fear, and then some of it is that when I learned growing up in the 70s, some people just are never going to care. They don't care about you. It's all about me, me, me. So it's our responsibility, all of us, to make sure that we keep this open and honest. I told the media the other day, they were like, well, this is not how we used to do things before. I'm like, well, you never had a black bald woman in front of you either that's running Jefferson County as a Commonwealth attorney. Come on, you all.
Yeah, you were the first Black woman to serve as Commonwealth attorney in Jefferson County in history.
It's true.
And so we think that our country is almost 250 years old, and you have to be a first.
That's right. It's humbling.
Thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. Now, you know, I know you wouldn't say it, but you've given me that opportunity too. You've given a lot of us the opportunity to be in these positions at the Commonwealth attorney level that we've never seen in history. And all of us were back on the ballot, and we ran and we won. But it's the opportunity
because you're
for
all
us to
really
be
good
there.
at your job and earned every single bit of it.
I appreciate that.
I'm happy to be a small part of that
Appreciate you.
story, but this story is yours, and you more than earned all of it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm
right.
excited about what's to come.
Yeah.
I really am. So,
Jireina Weathers.
thank you.
This is a new segment called In My Kentucky Accent. That's when you're going to hear about things that really burn me, things that get me upset because I think our world and our country deserve better. The very first In My Kentucky Accent deals with Pete Hegseth. This is the Secretary of Defense, who now has not just been on one, but 2 text chains where classified information that could cause harm to our troops is being shared in a way that's not secure and with people who shouldn't have access to it. It appears this second chain is with some of his family members and maybe even his private lawyers. Now, Mark Twain said there's no education in the second kick of the mule, and this is the second kick. Listen, right now, this federal government is firing so many people without cause. Well, guess what? This president has all the cause he needs to fire this Secretary of Defense. He should have never been there. And listen, these text chains aren't Donald Trump's fault, but he's going to own it if he doesn't step up, do the right thing, and fire Secretary Hegseth. That is in my Kentucky accent. It's that time in every episode where I'm joined by the Johns, John McConnell and John Rabinowitz, to talk about some of the issues of the day. What I want to talk about, or at least start on today, are these massive layoffs going on in the federal government. Some of these agencies provide really important services. But I guess my first question is, what is the goal here? Is it to fix an agency or to break it?
Having been trained by John Morgan, I'm all about cutting wasteful spending, being efficient, being transparent. But I worry that we are not being mindful in the cuts that we are making. And I really struggle with the lack of empathy on the individuals that are making the cuts. As we've heard with some of your guests recently, it sounds like they're eliminating entire departments for no reason at all, other than they think it saves some money without thinking about what could happen in the future.
And these departments are created by statute, by law. So Congress passes a law that says we're going to have the department of this or that, or the cabinet of this or that. And then they appropriate money to it and say, not only are we going to have it, but here's the funding for it. And then the president not being able to just ignore the law is firing so many people at some of these agencies that they then cease to function.
Every day they wake up and they don't know what to expect. There are people taking buyouts because the risk of losing their job is too great.
And we talk about the experience that comes with a lot of these jobs, some being let go and some also taking early retirements. When you start to lose that much institutional knowledge inside those cabinets, one that sticks out to me is the FDA, specifically because in my world of insurance, it's something that we have to deal with. It's drugs that get distributed as well as treatments. You know, all of a sudden, if you start to lose enough people there, you're going to start to encounter a drug lag, which has to do with the approval of treatments and those new medications coming out, while other countries may not have that issue.
Or you're going to lessen the safety protocols.
Right.
These agencies are meant in some instances to protect us. I think about the cuts at the CIA. I mean, I lost a classmate in 9/11. Fewer analysts make us less safe. Think about cuts at the FBI. When I was Attorney General, I worked with FBI agents to catch child predators. Fewer FBI agents, we catch fewer predators. I worry about the cuts at the Department of Defense and what that will mean, cuts in our intelligence agencies.
Well, you've told me stories too recently about cuts in potential cuts with Social Security and how that affects the Commonwealth and people's access to Social Security.
So there's at least been a list published that shows some of our rural Social Security offices closing. And what that means is that a person that lives in that area is going to have to drive several hours on a fixed income to another office. But then what they're also doing is shutting down the call-in helpline. And so that person, who likely doesn't use a computer as much as maybe the rest of the population, is going to drive a couple of hours and not have all the documentation they need because they can't call on the phone and ask. And so they're going to miss a Social Security payment that they are rightfully entitled to, that they paid into, that they rely on for their life, because these obstacles have been intentionally put in their way.
You know, I also think about what in our Commonwealth, the weather issues we've dealt with this whole year. And I'm going to presume you work a lot with NOAA and the National Weather Service. And I mean, this funding could really affect that.
It does. One of our smaller National Weather Service offices in eastern Kentucky that has helped us prepare for all of these floods has lost a significant number of people.
You know, I also wonder, with all the cuts in funding, is there a chance the state would have to pick up some tabs?
Yes. So imagine every state having to do the same work 50 times that one group currently does right now. It wouldn't be efficient, and it would eat up the money that's meant to be there for our people in their time of need with all that overhead.
And a lot of these cabinets serve the people of the country. They're not just numbers in D.C. They're real communities. They're going to be people that your kids may play soccer with parents.
Yes.
So it's going to hit home.
And speaking of tough, as we're filming this, this is the Monday after Easter, and we learned this morning that Pope Francis passed away. To me, this was a person who went beyond just the Catholic faith and was looked up to as somebody who put their empathy and their love of people above just about anything else. John, you're Catholic. Tell me how.
Well,
how
first off, it shocks people that a Rabinowitz is Catholic. I am. Converted to Catholicism about 13 years ago. And really, this is the only Pope my girls have ever really known. And I heard him described one time as an inclusive change agent that built bridges instead of walls. And when I talked to my daughters about what an impactful person he was, how accessible he was, how his focus was on helping the homeless and speaking out for people that had no voice, I think it's a huge loss. I am very hopeful that our church will find a replacement, hopefully in the next few weeks, that will carry on his mission. But I will tell you, they're gigantic shoes to fill.
And John, this was a pope where even if you didn't agree with all of his policy positions, you respected him because he led with love.
Mm-hmm. And seemed to accept everyone and be willing to have a conversation, even the difficult ones. And I went back and I shared this with John, not being Catholic, trying to understand. And when you look at all the first he have, first Pope from the Americas, first non-European Pope, which is going to go back, and I heard this morning and I read it too, a millennia. I mean, that seems like what I kept hearing over and over again. And first from the Southern Hemisphere, first to attend a G7 summit, first Jesuit Pope, and the first Pope to take the name Francis, which is about being for the poor and leading from the bottom up, not the top down.
Yeah. First Pope to say so many positive things about populations that popes hadn't said positive things about. Just again, always defaulting to leading with his heart and not being always guided by dogma when your heart tells you that we should judge less, accept more.
Eddie, I found this quote that I said I was going to have to read tonight from him. And it just speaks volumes. The Lord never tires of forgiving. It is we who tire of asking for mercy and forgiveness. And so, I mean, in a nutshell, that's who he was.
The Andy Beshear podcast has welcomed my son, Will, my daughter, Lila, and now my wife of 19 years, Brittany. This segment is going to be called 5 Things You Didn't Know About Andy. I have not been told what any of them are. This might be as nervous as I've ever been on this podcast. So, Brittany,
yes.
Welcome to the Andy Beshear podcast.
Thank you. I didn't want to miss out on the fun, and Winnie is definitely helping me feel comfortable.
We now know who this dog loves the most.
Well, it was a given.
Fair.
Yeah. So I have 5-ish things that I think people would be interested to know about. We'll see if we get to the 5th one. I think the first thing that people may or may not know about you is that you actually are a very good horseman.
Oh, well, we didn't get this painting for nothing. My first job ever was mucking stalls at a horse farm, which gets you ready for politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but actually, you also are a very good rider that I've never seen in the time that I have met you, but your mom likes to tell me that you are very good.
She likes to tell you that because she wants me to get on a horse again. I got off the last horse I rode when I was 25 years old, pledged I would never get back on, and now my daughter is an equestrian, and my bank account reflects it.
Always about the bank account, Andy.
It is helpful for it to be positive.
That should have been one of my 5 things. Andy does not like to spend money ever. His very first chair in his apartment was a green plastic lawn chair. And let me tell you, if we had not lost it in a move, he would still be sitting in it
To
today.
be fair, in our first apartment, we had both a recliner and
From
the green
1973.
lawn chair. We did buy it used. And when we wanted to go out on the porch,
What is this we?
we'd carry them out there,
What?
and then we'd bring them back to the den.
Yeah, we did that.
But it was while yes, we needed more furniture. It was kind of nice when we didn't have so much stuff.
It was great. Yeah.
Remember one story? Didn't at one point wasn't there a picnic table in the house for a few minutes?
Yes, indeed. Actually,
Yes.
that became
Yes,
our dining
indeed.
room table.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
You bet.
So we ordered this outdoor patio furniture, I think from Target,
Indeed. Yeah.
and it shows up. And at that point, I realized it is nicer than our kitchen table. And so I figured, why not just replace the kitchen table with the patio furniture? No one will notice.
No, we could
Put a
fit a lot of
tablecloth.
people around that. That's fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very true.
We could fit a
Very
lot of
true.
kids around that table.
I only had that as our kitchen table until I was elected governor.
Yep. And it's sitting in storage for when we need to buy
Oh,
a
you
house.
still have it.
It's a perfectly
Still
good
there.
table.
Well,
Maybe we'll bring back the green lawn chair
If we can find it.
if we can find it. Well, the next thing you actually touched on, I thought people would be interested to know that your first job was mucking out stalls and teaching horseback riding lessons, which neither of which are easy jobs to do.
So I started at about 14 mucking stalls at a lesson barn. If you got done mucking stalls, your reward was weed eating all of the fields, and that's something. It teaches you a little bit about life. Then graduated up to teaching kids how to ride,
Yep.
and it was a way where, you know, as a teenager earning minimum wage, which I think was $5.25 an hour at that point, I could eventually, once I turned 16, fill up the gas in my car.
Yeah. Yeah. Which actually, I swear we did not talk about this, leads me to my next
Oh,
question.
my first car.
Your first car, because we
let's hear
talked.
this.
And now, wait,
Yeah, I
hold
wanna
on. We
hear.
talk about this because as of this morning, look out, Kentucky, because Will Beshear has his driver's permit. So
Though he is going to be the best driver.
he has
follows
actually
rules.
I had a friend say when our kids were 4 or 5, the only teenage driver she would allow her children to be in a car with was Will Beshear.
Well, we'll see if that's real now that he has his permit.
That's right.
So everybody thinks that if you become governor or your dad at some point was governor, you're really fancy. You know, sometimes people are trying to attack and they say, well, how old were you when your dad was elected governor? And I look at them and say, 30.
Yeah.
And then they don't quite know what to say after
Yeah.
that. But my first car wasn't, in fact, my car. On my 16th birthday, I got my brother's used car, and he got a new used car. It was a 1982 Chevy Cavalier. This thing was 2 doors, though there were technically seats in the back. You really couldn't sit back there. And it was manual. And it was one where if you didn't hit it perfectly, you lurched in that car, and everyone had whiplash. I think I figured out how to make my seatbelt so tight. I was like an astronaut in NASA on takeoff that I just couldn't move.
Didn't you have a door that didn't work?
Oh,
Am I making that up?
the door handle had pulled off, so you had to kind of grab all of it, and the tacking and the ceiling was coming down too. But at the same point, I could drive, and so I loved it. And there was something about pulling up in school and finding where all the fanciest kids, who maybe their parents owned a dealership, had these really nice cars, and I'd always pull up between the 2 nicest ones I could find just to make sure I ruined any picture they would try to take.
So learning all this information today, when you were 16 and 17 and you would go out on dates, would you pick up the date on a horse or the
Wait,
Cavalier?
I'm sorry.
Cavalier,
Wait,
sure.
John, wait. You're assuming that Andy had a date in high school.
This is
There you go.
this is true. Fair point.
There you go. I didn't want to peak too early.
Okay. I think you snorted.
I got
Did
a
you-
story. You got me.
Did you wear a cowboy hat?
I did have a cowboy hat. It actually helped me
Question.
get my first girlfriend. So I had
there
at
was
one
a-
point I also had a giant Ale81 belt buckle. For those not from Kentucky, it is a Kentucky soft drink, kind of like a hyper caffeinated ginger ale. It was delicious when I drank soft drinks. But yeah, let me tell you, with that hat and that belt buckle, whew.
Just wait till I get a hold of the comments section.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Britainy Beshear. And that's a wrap on episode 3 of the Andy Beshear podcast. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a little, laughed a little, but I hope that right now you feel less stress than when we started. It is a tough world, but remember, especially after Easter, there's always hope. And there's more love in this world than there will ever be hate. In my faith, Easter reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there's a light in that darkness, and the darkness has never put it out. So stay strong, keep the faith. We'll see you back for episode 4.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe at Andy Beshear Podcast on all major social media platforms.